The new NFL league year is coming up quickly, and we know the Chargers have some moves to do, but they made their first big step towards getting under the cap by releasing starting linebacker Eric Kendricks.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen, and thank you to all the everydayers out there. To make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, the first domino has fallen, and we know that the Chargers had to make some moves to get under the cap. That first move was cutting linebacker Eric Kendricks. Now that Eric Kendricks is gone, does that open up the door for Daiyan Henley to potentially start at linebacker for the Chargers? And what is the number one overall draft goal that the Chargers must get accomplished in this 2024 draft?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting question, because if you can only whittle it down to like one thing, I mean, to me, I have something in mind, which I don't know if a lot of people are thinking about going into that. But I do want to tell you guys that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. David, we've now seen the first domino fall, as you said. It's Eric Kendricks, and this is one of the more obvious cuts that we saw coming and talked about before when we did Stay or Go, which is just Eric Kendricks is likely not going to be on the team because it is one of the easier things the Chargers can do to get cap compliant. And they don't have to clear up all the space they need right before the entire offseason free agency and everything, but they have to get compliant. They have to get under the salary cap. Now they do this and save $6.5 million, which gets them pretty close to, being one move away from getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really surprised at this move at all, Daniel. I think this is one that we all kind of expected. You just look at the math. The math made a lot of sense in this situation. He's 32 years old. I felt like he played pretty well for the most part last year. I think he definitely did improve the Chargers' run game. I thought he was okay in coverage. But he was signed by the old head coach and the old general manager. So a guy that was part of that old regime just seemed like a move that was highly probable and a move that definitely came to fruition.
And I think of Joe Ortiz when he talks about, not just what he was going to do with the salary cap and saying, hey, we are going to get under, but also just trying to figure out when players are going to decline and letting them go at the right time and if they're going to be able to pay off what they're going to be owed that upcoming season. And it's hard to say that with Eric Kendricks, but obviously it does open up another spot that they're going to have to fill. Right now, the good thing is they're one Mike Williams cut away from being cap compliant. And to me, that is something I'll say is going to happen within the next week or so before March 13th when they have to get under. But there's still a lot of work to do. According to Daniel Popper, when he's factoring in the in-season budget the team has to have and what they're going to have to pay their draft picks, the Chargers are basically $37 million over the salary cap, or at least what they're going to have to get to at bare minimum, right? So the Mike Williams part of that brings that down to, $17 million, but there's still some work to do. This doesn't necessarily mean they're going free agency shopping, right? As far as Eric Kendricks, I understood the move at the time, but at the time too, we were saying, hey, you have a guy in Drue Tranquill that's pretty good as well. Kenneth Murray has been a liability for a little while now too. I think he was hugely instrumental in the Chargers, the great lengths they went to improve their run defense last year after it being one of the worst that we've ever seen the 2 years prior to that. He was a huge part of that. He was a liability in coverage, and I think a lot of that is coaching too. I mean, we talked about it so much, like having him and Kenneth Murray on the field on as many third and longs as Brandon Staley did just was putting them in a situation to fail. Like that.
Yeah, it was a head scratcher.
I mean, and I do think, Eric Kendricks has probably lost half a step, and he got run away from a couple of times, right? The team speed was not helped with Eric Kendricks, and I think you need to get faster and more athletic on that side of the ball. So it makes a lot of sense. But he had 6% missed tackles last year. That's something we craved, having someone that wouldn't, have those missed tackles that turned short runs into long runs. And I think the biggest thing was just how he was used, especially in coverage. I think kind of let them down, but I do think he gets a little bit of unnecessary hate. But now what's next is what is next at linebacker for the Chargers. And right now you're basically assuming Kenneth Murray is going to leave, which leaves you with two pretty unproven guys behind him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the linebacker position, and it is inevitably going to look very, very different next season. And I mean, the only linebackers that are currently under contract for the Chargers are Nick Niemann, Daiyan Henley, Amon Ongbang-Bamiga, and Tanner Muse, which both of those two last guys are primarily special teams players. They do not get,
and they're both restricted free agents. So
right, yeah, so they don't really seem to factor much into the middle linebacker rotation type of situation. But I mean, they're going to have to add. I mean, I'm sure they have a couple players that are excited about, maybe with Neiman and Daiyan Henley, but they have to add to that position. I feel like this is something, a position group that they might look at free agency for, and I think they might even double dip and grab one in the draft as well, just depending on how the draft shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Daiyan Henley, it's so tough because the sample size is so small. Yeah. And I think the big part of this, as far as what's next, because I do think you'll have to address it in some way. I mean, if that's something you feel like you can take care of in free agency and feel like you can shore that up a little bit and get a starter out of either Daiyan Henley or Nick Niemann, I think that obviously gives you more flexibility going into the draft, right? Finding starters for this team in free agency at a low price is going to be what decides, how successful this season can be in a lot of ways. Nick Niemann, he's been pretty good, right? Another guy just with a small
solid
sample size. I mean, career high, 247 snaps last season. He has one missed career tackle or career missed tackle in over 300 snaps. So he's always been a good tackler. He had the play this year against TJ Hawkinson that got the Chargers the win over the Vikings. He's solid, but you can't. It's more about, does this staff have enough faith? Can they see on film something that's going to tell them that they don't need to heavily address this position, that they have a starting linebacker or two starting linebackers in those two players? You can't only have two, capable of playing linebackers. You need more than that, and they'll still have to build depth either way. But a lot of that's going to decide how urgent they think that need is, right? Because I think there's some other spots in the Chargers, whether it's cornerback, whether it's the defensive line, safety, where you feel even worse about the depth and the guys they still have on the roster there, right? So if that's somewhere where they feel like they can get something out of those guys and don't have to address it with as much resources as maybe if they have to replace both of them, I think that's a huge win. And it also brings up our first mailbag question, because we are getting into our Chargers mailbag today, from Robert Oliver, actually from a while ago in February, but we never got to it. Will Daiyan Henley start at linebacker next year? So we talked about kind of what each of those guys bring to the table. But David, if you're putting your money on it right now, are you saying that Daiyan Henley will start at linebacker in 2024?
Yeah, my money is definitely on Daiyan Henley starting at linebacker for the Chargers in 2024, and I think it's just because of what he brings to the table. Yes, it was a very small sample size, but the one thing that is a reoccurring theme for me when I'm watching Daiyan Henley is he is always around the football, constantly around the football. He is in on almost every single play. He has natural coverage instincts because he is, a former defensive back. He's a guy that I feel like has the ability. He has the tackling ability. He has that coverage ability. I think he's a really good mix. He's just young and he's unproven. But I feel like you get him in the middle of this defense, and I feel like you can really bring some athleticism back to the Chargers in the middle.
Yeah, he definitely is athletic enough to play the position. He was a really, really good tackler in college, and I think we've seen that translate in the small sample size that we have. I think he also fits what Jesse Minter wants to do, right? Which is having players, if we're looking at the Mike McDonald's defenses or even what his own linebackers were at Michigan, they weren't big 260, 250-pound dudes, right?
Right.
The league is going in a different direction. I would say yes, just because I think if it came down to him or Nick Niemann and them adding someone they feel like can start next to whoever they pick from those two, I would pick Daiyan Henley just because, I think there's a reason why he was picked in the third round. I think he can show a lot more than he did. And I just think that with him, like, I have a hard time thinking he's going to be really bad. Like, if they throw him out there,
I feel like the upside is high.
The upside is really high, but I do think, like, it would surprise me if he was just really, really bad. And I think he would do enough with his athleticism, with his instincts, and things like that to justify having him out there, like to outweigh the bad. I think the good would, right? So I think that with him, if I'm saying it right now, I would say, hey, out of necessity, I mean, it feels like he's going to have to be a starter. We'll see how much they address it in free agency. But one of our fans wondered if maybe a reunion could happen with the Chargers and Drue Tranquill, someone who's been smearing their name and throwing some shade, but also pretty good player as well. So we're going to get into that, and also what the number one priority should be for the Chargers going into this also important draft with the 5th overall pick. All that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. I do want to tell you guys, though, to get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get a $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. You find a bet you like, you bet $5, and if you win, you get $150 in bonus bets. March Madness is also right around the corner as the NBA heats up towards playoff time. But if you're missing football, I totally understand that as well. And another great thing is you can also bet on the NFL draft with FanDuel. Right now, you can go bet on who will be the 5th pick in the draft. Will it be Joe Alt? Right now, he is the favorite for the 5th overall pick, but it doesn't say Charger specific, right? It could be another team, I guess. But right behind him is Malik Nabers at plus 380. And if you're feeling frisky, you could even go with Marvin Harrison Jr. at plus 1,000. But all you have to do that is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. David, let's get into more of these fan mail questions that we had here, because I think one thing that goes great with this conversation is a question that I got in my Twitter DMs from Nico Costa, who said, with our current cap situation and the parting ways with Eric Kendricks, can you see the Chargers bring back Drue Tranquill with how cheap his future contract could be? I know he made comments about the city of LA, but with Jim in town, does it all get washed away, and does he fit the system? David, any chance for a reunion here?
Hell nah. Nah, no chance. Definitely not happening. I'm sorry. I mean, you can't get away with saying the things that he said about the Chargers, drunk or not. I mean, celebrating a Super Bowl or not. Nobody's going to want to bring you back to your franchise when you're bad-mouthing them the way that you did. Sorry. I appreciated Drue Tranquill, the type of player that he is and that he was for the Kansas City Chiefs last year. He did all of the same things that we kind of saw from Drue Tranquill. But no way, no how, not happening.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think with some of the things that have come out since him leaving, right, especially with the Brand Staley firing and the Gift Smith being promoted, some of the things that he kind of, put out there made it seem like there was definitely bad blood with Staley. Was that, because he didn't get a contract offer after his final season? Was it more with Tom Telesco for not wanting to bring him back? We'll never know the extent of it, but there was also a period where it was said that Drue Tranquill got an offer from the Chargers and he turned it down, which was later disputed by Daniel Popper and others. And there was a lot of, things being thrown around on social media. So I think that bridge is burned. I do think for Jesse Minter's, system to have somebody that can cover the way he was able to and getting some athleticism, I think he could play. Yeah. I just don't think it's going to happen with that specific guy, with this specific team. I think it's too soon. And it'll be interesting to see what his contract is, because obviously he didn't get much last year, but was a big part of the Chiefs' defense during that playoff run. Let's get to David's homie here, Alvin, one of David's favorite Chargers fans out there. They've never had any beef ever. And he asked today, what should the Chargers' #1 goal in the draft be, in your opinion? This is a big question, David, a very broad question. There's a lot of ways you could go with that. But if you're trying to narrow it down into what you need to see the Chargers do in the 2024 draft, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it's more theme-based, and it goes along with what everyone's been saying. We're going to bring the physicality. We are going to bring the toughness. That has to resonate with the type of players that you pick. And I think you can't really just look any one specific way, because there's a lot of things that the Chargers need to improve upon, a lot of bodies, a lot of position groups that they need to address. So it's got to be best player available that also is physical, tough, and brings that type of mentality to the table every single day, because that's the type of team that Jim Harbaugh wants to create.
Yeah, I mean, so I think getting the right guys is a huge thing. Getting the guys that are going to be there to help you change the culture, because right now it's all talk until it actually happens. And
exactly.
One of the huge steps into making it happen is by having the right kind of players, and also getting more out of the players you currently have, right? Because that's the big thing about this draft is right now the Chargers have 7 picks. What that final total will be, it's hard to say. Obviously, if they trade out of 5, it should be much more than that, but you just don't know at this point. So I think the #1 thing for me is just adding as much talent anywhere you can, kind of regardless of position to an extent, right? Because to me, it's just there are way too many holes on this roster. You're not going to be able to fill them all in the draft.
Yeah.
You can't get caught trying to reach for need or things like that when really overall this roster just needs a huge infusion of talent. So, you know, I think it really can be positionless to the extent of like any position you add, there's a good case to be made that the Chargers really need someone at that position. So
Yeah.
I think you have to just try to add as much talent as possible. I don't think you can try to, you know, reach on certain positions. And yeah, finding the players that fit Jim Harbaugh's system. And I think, you know, kind of a sub goal is always just getting Justin Herbert more help, right? Like that's always trying to maximize Justin Herbert. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, right? You could do that with a running back, you could do that with an offensive lineman, or you could do that with, you know, a crazy tight end or one of the best wide receiver prospects we've seen in a while. So a lot of different ways you could do it, but I mean, that would be my personal way of how I would get it done. So let's get to this next one here from Ian Shane Wicks, who asked us on Twitter. Joe Alt, the left tackle from Notre Dame, has said in interviews this past week that he is a natural left, but is willing to play right. Do you think that sways Harbaugh, Ortiz, and Roman anymore knowing that bit of information, or do you think they still show the same interest in trading back in other weapons? David, I do think this is something that's underrated as far as how easy it is to do for a player to come in and switch sides. I mean, I think we've seen that even with someone like Zion Johnson, right, whose rookie year never felt like he got off to the start he should have because he switched sides, and we kind of all said, yeah, he can do it. He's a smart guy, you know, whatever. But I do think it's underrated. So I think that is something that has to come into play when you're talking about the 5th overall pick, which is likely where you would take Joe Alt if you're going to take him. You're taking someone that is going to have to switch sides, and that isn't something that necessarily always translates, especially immediately.
Yeah, for me, I'm just personally not interested in having a player that's not ready-made, ready to go with the 5th overall pick. And especially if we're talking about a tackle that played left tackle his entire scholastic career, and now we're going to switch him over to the right side in the pros. Not saying that it's not capable or it's not possible of happening and him being productive. I just don't want to use a premium resource like that on a player that there's no guarantee that that transition is going to translate at the NFL level. I just need more of a sure thing with my 5th overall pick. So if it's between Joe Alt and trading back, then I'm trading back.
Yeah, another thing I'm not going to do either is move Rashawn Slater from left to right tackle.
Not a
I've seen
chance.
that floated out there. You have a great thing. You have someone who literally has an all-pro in basically 2 seasons because he's really only played in 2
put that
full
thought
seasons.
out of your mind.
You keep him at left tackle, protecting Justin Herbert's blind side. You know, I think when you get too, you know, tricky trying to move things around, it can look a little discombobulated. And the Chargers had a little bit of that last year, right? Trying to move Sawyer from left tackle to left guard, moving Zion Johnson back to the right side. I think the other thing you look at, too, is some players who have done it recently at the NFL level. Like Penei Sewell is great, and he's going to get paid because we were talking about before the show, like, before, if you weren't a left tackle, you were automatically going to make a huge chunk less than the right tackle, or opposite, right? If you're a right tackle, you're going to make a huge chunk less than the left tackles. But it's gotten a lot closer, you know, with the stud right tackles that are out there. If you look at the top, like if you're a great tackle, regardless of what side you are, you're going to get paid. There's more prestige on the left side. And this is the thing about Joe Alt. I've watched Joe Alt. I like him. He's a very, very good tackle. He definitely could be the best tackle in this draft class, especially left tackle, right? At the same time, though, like I'm not as blown away as some other people are. I understand how some people think that Joe Alt is definitely someone that has to be the number 1 tackle taken, but I understand that people that are also saying, like, hey, it's a lot closer. He's not as sure thing as some people think he is. But I think for me, you know, a guy who's very, very good, above average run blocker. I didn't see him give up a sack or lose anything badly in pass protection. But I just think that for me, I'm not taking him with the 5th overall pick. I would much rather take any of the receivers we've talked about. I'd rather take Brock Bowers than some of the other guys we've talked about. Yeah. I'm staying away from Joe Alt if I have the opportunity to, unless it's a trade back situation, you can get more value to fill other holes. It's not as big of a need, and I don't think he's as good of a player as some of those other guys. But we still have much more to get into because it is our Chargers mailbag, and we have some more great questions, including ranking the top 3 wide receivers in the upcoming draft class because we've talked about all 3. We haven't specifically ranked them yet. We'll also talk about if this deep wide receiver class might be good for the Chargers, but also might be better for the Chiefs given what their needs are. So we're going to talk about that and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I do want to tell you guys about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. David, let's continue this Chargers mailbag with some more draft stuff, especially regarding these wide receivers, because that has been a lot of the talk, and I've seen, all of the top 3 wide receivers mocked to the Chargers in one place or another. But thank you to everyone who checked out today's show and the everydayers out there, and to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC and also called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. I also want to tell you guys, make sure you're checking out the first ever 24/7 national sports streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today, giving you coverage of every sport the way that only the Locked On local experts can give you. So make sure you guys go subscribe to that. But we have this question here, David, from Edward Matthias, who says, what's your guys' feelings on the top 3 wide receivers? Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, or Odunze? And if these 3 were available and Bowers was still there, who would your pick be? Thanks, guys. Keep up the great work and Charger up. So, David, I think I can speak for both of us when I would say that we both have Marvin Harrison Jr. 1, Malik Nabers number 2, Rome Odunze number 3. I think the next part of it just becomes like, okay, how do you rank them, I guess, to Brock Bowers, right? And then how close are those two, and what would you do in those situations if you were the Chargers picking and you had all those guys available?
Yeah, so number 1, first and foremost, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is there, it's an automatic take for me. No matter who else is on the board, I feel like that's just a one that you set it and forget it. You take it and you move on. I think for Malik Nabers, it's a very almost similar situation. I feel really good about the pick. I'm very excited about the receiver that he is, the separation he provides, just the electric playmaker that he is. Now, if it comes down to Odunze or Brock Bowers, that's a little bit of a tougher conversation for me because personally, and I mean, I'm just saying myself, I am a huge Brock Bowers fan, and I think that he is going to be a dynamic weapon at the NFL level. He can be moved all over the place. You just got to get the ball in his hands. He's got really, really good hands. He runs really good routes. He is just an exceptional weapon, and I feel like that's a guy I would really love to see paired with Justin Herbert. So that's the only real difficult decision for me is Odunze or Brock Bowers, and I think I probably lean closer to Brock Bowers.
Yeah, I think I would go Bowers over Odunze. I mean, I think both of them would fit in the same tier of just guys I would rather them trade back for.
Yeah.
Even though I love Brock Bowers, for me, it's Marvin Harrison Jr., take him no matter what. With Malik Nabers, if he's there at 5 and they take him, I will be happy. If they trade back, it'll suck because I want Malik Nabers, but I would also understand it. For the other 2 guys, I'd be upset if they were taken at 5 because it means that probably other guys were available there that I would rather take. But I would still have Bowers over Rome Odunze just as far as getting that kind of yak threat, right? The best yak threat I've seen as a tight end coming out, and a dude who really has a good overall game, even as someone who's a little undersized, has a ton of production to back up what that obvious talent and athleticism is. So let's get to this next one here from Nicholas Petrilli, who asks, this year's depth at wide receiver has excited all of us Chargers fans with optimism the Chargers can grab a great wide receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round. That's great for us, but it's also good for the Chiefs. Does the stacked wide receiver class benefit the Chargers or Chiefs more? This one's a little trickier, David. What would you say?
I'm not really worried about the Chiefs. I mean, honestly, my answer is that the Chargers have way too many problems to worry about what the Chiefs are doing and what's good for the Chiefs. They need to worry about the Chargers, and they need to worry about getting themselves right, because in years past, I thought they were pretty close to the Chiefs. I thought they were able to compete. I don't necessarily feel that right now because there's a lot of holes that the Chargers need to fill. And I love the leadership, obviously, with Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz at the helm, but they got a lot of work to do before they can feel like they can sit here and seriously compete or dethrone the Kansas City Chiefs. So, yeah, it's a great draft for them. It's a great draft for the Chargers, but they got to focus on the Chargers. That's really got to be the focus going forward.
Yeah, you can't worry about what the other teams are going to get. And it would definitely suck, if the Chiefs end up getting a really good wide receiver out of this draft class. I mean, obviously, I think they would probably have to take one of those guys in round 1 for where they're going to pick in the second round. I think a lot of these really, really good names
they'll be
there
gone.
still. Or it might not be there, I should say. But, it's better for the Chargers because it gives them more flexibility of what they can do with the 5th overall pick. Because knowing that there's more talented wide receivers makes it not as important that you come away with the 5th overall pick or potentially whatever you trade back to in the first round. Whereas with the Chiefs, yeah, they could get a good wide receiver, but the Chargers need to be worried about not only getting a receiver, but maybe potentially getting a wide receiver and still being able to fill those biggest holes that you were talking about. So I still think it's better for the Chargers. If both Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes get a good receiver, I'm still going to take that because I want to see what Justin Herbert looks like with some of these guys that are in this draft. So
Agreed.
I totally get the point there, and it's going to suck if they get a good receiver, right? But, hopefully with Andy Reid retiring soon, we hope. Travis Kelce hopefully retiring soon after his brother just did.
Follow your brother.
Hopefully
right
that
on
takes
out
a
of the
step
National
back
Football League
and kind of lessens the impact of them getting a good receiver. So
yeah,
let's get to this next one here from Minky SD, who says, with the long string of failed and very different coaching regimes, do you think that they finally have a competent coaching staff? Will be a culture shock to the point where it might be demoralizing for the players who do end up on this roster? Thanks. That's a good question, David, because I think a lot of people look at the good side of the Jim Harbaugh culture and everything they're bringing in. But I do think there are going to be guys it's not necessarily going to gel with. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be uncomfortable. But you know what's uncomfortable? Change. Change is uncomfortable. But you know what soothes that? Winning. And you know what Jim Harbaugh does? He wins every single place that he goes. So I think it's going to be a little bit tough to deal with for some people. But at the end of the day, when they start winning and start winning consistently, they're going to forget all about that. That's what it matters. That's what matters at this level.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question because I think when you're talking about Jim Harbaugh and the space that he's had since he was an NFL coach, I think it's fair to wonder if the way that he coached the 49ers, right, is still going to work in today's modern NFL with, younger players getting paid more than he's going to get paid and things like that, right? Because there's going to be several Chargers who are going to be higher paid than Jim Harbaugh the minute he steps in there. So
sure,
the dealing with those kind of egos at the NFL level is a little bit different, and you don't know how it's going to go if they don't agree. To me, if you're able to kind of strain out, some of the people that aren't a fit for it because of that, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you need to get guys who are going to buy in, because buy-in has been such a huge part of why Jim Harbaugh has been able to succeed. So I think what you would say is, hey, he was just with younger players, the last 7 or 8 years, right? With Michigan, he had guys there.
Yeah.
Right. He, 10 years pretty much, right? Yeah. But he's dealt with young college kids who are always on their phone and things like that, and he's still been able to find a way to connect, and you hear it from his players, right? You hear how much they love him and how highly they think of him. And I think the good thing here is he comes in Brandon Staley tried to change everything when he had nothing to back up what he said was going to work, because he's going to step in there. They can't win in May, right? They can't win in April, right? So he's going to have to come in and get them to buy in before he can actually put a win in the win column. So I think the thing that's different here is he's bringing all of his staff to kind of, it's going to be everywhere, right? The culture is going to be all over the place, and you're going to be getting the message that Jim Harbaugh wants disseminated. But the bigger thing is just this, with Jim Harbaugh, he's gotten the buy-in everywhere, and he comes with the credentials to demand the respect right away, to where players
his
have
reputation
a reason.
precedes him. Yeah.
Players have a reason to believe in him, even though they've never seen it work for them. But I think that what they want, and like he talked about, right, it's all going to be worth it. This part sucks, but you know what else sucks? Winning 5 games in a season. So I don't really care about that, right? But let's get to this last thing from Greg Williams here, who says, I feel that now the pain and the suffering we had inflicted on us from the Jacksonville Jaguar game through the 24 season is now worth it because of the ripple effect that got Staley out and Harbaugh in. David, do you agree?
1,000% agree. We had to go through it. It sucked. I hated it. It was very uncomfortable. But we are now here with Jim Harbaugh as our head coach. And who's got it better than us? Nobody.
Yeah, it is. And obviously you hope it works. It has to work out for it to all be worth it, right? I still wish that Justin Herbert had a playoff win. That would stop at least that conversation. But if Harbaugh doesn't come out this year, who knows if he comes out next year, right? If Brandon Staley wins that game, who knows what the level of security he would have had going into 2023 and how that changes things. So in the grand scheme of things, it lands you Jim Harbaugh, which is a coach that, the caliber that Chargers fans have wanted for so long. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Thank you to everyone again who hit us up at LockedOnLAC on Twitter and also on the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. We will also be getting into much more this week as free agency is right around the corner. So make sure you guys are back here tomorrow by subscribing or following for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listening wherever you get your podcast from. As you know, we are your team every day. So, hey, if Mike Williams gets back here and gets cut tomorrow, we're going to be here talking about it because that's what we do. So make sure you're always around for the latest news that comes out. And you can also find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer at Dro Talk SD. But every day, it's going to get a little bit crazier as this season comes already, and I can't wait for it. But make sure you guys are back here for tomorrow. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.